Hello, I am the Sump Addict, Tobias Silver, and this lovely hole in the ground is Gothic Sump. It's in the OFD cave system, or Ogof Ffynnon Ddu. I am almost certain I'm mispronouncing that. The actual spelling is on the screen right now. I apologise to the Welsh nation, but in my defence, it's really hard to say this specific cave. Most of your language is very phonetic, but this one is an absolute nightmare to figure out how to pronounce. So this is, as you may be able to see, me laying some line because this is a new exploration, or at the very least, I am the first person to put line in this sump. It is the upstream rather than the downstream. There will be another video on the downstream sometime soon on this channel. The downstream is quite a well-known dive. It's quite, simple, nice and varied, and decently long. The upstream is an incredibly narrow bedding plane, and this is the first attempt to actually make the through trip. This is split over multiple dives, so you will see multiple dives over this, and I'll talk you through the process. This is the first proper dive where I'm properly laying line. As you can see there, I've got a bunch of these kind of rubber bands around my wrists. They're called Snoopy loops. They're what we do for tying off to rocks in a more kind of permanent fashion. They do tend to survive quite nicely, and it means if the rocks move about a bit, it doesn't detension the line. It kind of allows them to have a little bit of a wiggle. As you can see, my reel is rather positive. I do solve this in a second by putting a couple rocks in it. In fact, actually, I did cut out a bit earlier where I let go of the reel and it ended up in a rift in the ceiling and I had to wiggle my way to retrieve it. But this is the kind of things that you work out while you're doing kind of exploration. Is everything is figuring out a new thing. That reel, for example, is a hose reel for garden hoses. It's not a diving reel. It's not designed for this, but it holds a huge amount of this 5mm bright pink polyprop, which is both cheaper and better at surviving in the kind of currents of a real cave in the UK than the kind of thin glow line that you see in like places like Florida. We also, because we're in very cold water, we tend to be using either very thick wet gloves like those 5mm I'm currently wearing, or dry gloves. And thick line is really appreciated when you don't have very much dexterity. So this point is about 8 meters into the sump. I have not gone very far at all. It's very slow going because of how narrow it is, and this is the point where I think most of the exploration stopped. Every time I have read anything about trying to dive through this upstream, it was basically just saying they got a bit in, it was impenetrable, and it just didn't work, didn't fit. It was too difficult, too narrow, and it is incredibly narrow. I totally get it. You have to kind of squeeze yourself through it, which underwater is a hell of an undertaking. However, just to kind of make it in perspective here, we're like less than 2 meters deep. I have a pair of 7s on. I could stay here for hours if I needed to, and there wouldn't really be any concern. And where we know this comes out on the other side, well, it's not very far away at all. In fact, when I actually measured it, when I finished the exploration, it was only about 32 meters of sump, so it's really, really short, really, really shallow. So I cut a little cut there as I drag myself through this. But this is the tight section, and there's a little bit of a respite because there's a rift in the ceiling there. But you're very much having to kind of drag yourself through it. It is good fun. I do thoroughly enjoy it, and it's definitely made a lot more awkward by the fact that I am doing the line, doing the exploration, knocking up all the silt, and having to figure out the route through. A lot of people who do this dive now, who follow the wonderfully laid pink line, just follow the line and they go through the easiest bits. When I was having to explore this, I was having to try every little, narrow bit to figure out which bit you could actually fit through. And because it's a wide bedding plane, there's a lot of options. So I spend a lot of time on this exploration dive basically trying a certain direction, not going that far because it gets too narrow, trying another direction, not going too far because it gets too narrow, and keep repeating. And that is kind of eventually what I laid down as a method. The silt is actually quite heavy in here, which is quite nice, despite there being a decent amount of flow at the moment. It's staying roughly put, which means that, I kick up a bunch and then I move into the upstream and it all kind of doesn't go any further. And one of the benefits of that is that, especially for the video, while I'm doing the actual exploration, I am not messing up any of the viz for further exploration. If this was a downstream exploration, I would be having a much more significantly difficult time. Now, this is the break of the tight section. It opens up quite nicely here. It's still narrow, but it's now the kind of narrow where you can kind of glide and pull. You're not squeezing your way through. And there does happen to be a very nice tie-off around here, a natural tie-off. Now, all the tie-offs up to this point have been what are referred to as rock belays. Basically, it is a rock that is tied in to kind of act as a weight. Nothing too complicated. And the idea really is that will hold it where it needs to be. However, with enough flow, it's going to dislodge stuff. They're going to move around. They're not going to be perfect. So we do try and have natural tie-offs as frequently as possible. Tie-offs like this, which is a nice big, rock protrusion here. And the main thing with this is that this isn't going to go anywhere. And this being tied in naturally means that the rocks are less likely to move because they're under tension. They will still move, but they'll be much easier to replace because you just kind of move them until the tension returns. This is the first good natural belay. There are some passages I dive in where there are just no natural belays, and that's just the reality of diving there. Often there are at least a couple slightly dodgy ones. Now, you get the joys of watching me do knots underwater. It is very difficult to do knots underwater, especially in 5mm gloves, because you don't have the same kind of gravity, especially on the floaty polyprop line, where you can kind of push stuff through, let it fall through, things like that. You have to kind of throw it through, which does make things a little tricky. So I've actually cut out most of that knot tying. I think it was about 10 minutes long, if I remember right, how long I was tying that knot. And that could be a bit of my inexperience with doing exploration. This is the first bit of exploration I ever did. So now we're back to kind of route finding. It's important to kind of see here, as you look off to the right, there is very clearly a way that the passage goes. I did check that out, but this is to kind of show you that there are just so many routes that are available, and you need to try every single one of them, not just the obvious onward passage. As I say, I did check that one out. It was too narrow, but it could have been the way on, and there was no real way to know until someone's actually done the exploration. At this point, I think I'm tying off the line. I'm pretty sure the GoPro got knocked a bit, and that's why you can't see what I'm doing. This is a lot of rubbing the helmet on the ceiling. The helmet was quite badly abraded when I finished this. It was very kind of like chewed up from rubbing against the top of the ceiling the whole time. And at some point soon, I kind of find a nice tie-off, and I go discover a bit of dry passage. I don't think this is what's happening yet. This is more the second half. Around here-ish, I believe, is where I did the large natural tie-off that's kind of in front of me. And I discovered that there is a bit of passage off that way. That's not the way I went initially. Initially, I kind of followed this rift through. But there's a nice kind of large flat slab. You hear my helmet abrading against the ceiling there. And then you kind of find this kind of low bedding plane that's really quite exciting. When I surface in it, I'll tell you the wonderful story of me thinking I had made the mother of all discoveries, and then finding out actually in reality it's a good discovery. But that is definitely a contrast to go from, oh my god, I have found huge amounts of new dry cave, to, oh no, actually it turns out I have not found any dry cave, just a bit of wet cave, just a bit of sump, and a tiny little side passage. So, but still, it's exciting. I found about, as I said earlier, about 32 meters of sump, surveyed it all, got it all added into the large map, and I also managed to find about 20 meters of a dry side passage that just no one had looked through. It was very, very tight, very, very narrow, and people just hadn't given it a go, or if they had, nobody had documented or surveyed it. And it's the only real reason I found that out is because when you come out of the other way out of this sump, it is really quite obvious that that's the way to go. But from the dry side, it is definitely not obvious at all which way to go. It just looks like a tiny bit in the side, and you're just like, really? That's passage? That does not look like something anyone could fit through, let alone me, which, you know, I'm a good 6 foot. I am decently broad-shouldered as well. It does really kind of make the really tight stuff a bit difficult for me. And I was looking at that going, there's no way I could fit through that. And then when I came back through it the other way, I turned around and went, really? There? So this is the surface. This is a bit of passage called Shortcut Passage. Now, at this point in time, I didn't know that. At this point, I was like, wow, okay, I've gone through to this new dry passage at the end of this sump. I wonder what it's like. So you can kind of hear my regs kind of groan a little bit. They're not very happy outside the water. But I did a bit of dry exploration in this and spent quite a while. This is the whole dive now, just from the main dive base, just so you can see it. But I'm going to chat about the story because I think it's interesting. But as I kind of arrived in that dry section for the first time, there was some choice words were said because I was very elated with my progress. And I was like, okay, well, I'll go check it out. So I had a CO2 monitor with me. It's something I usually bring whenever there's potential for dry passage beyond a sump and air bells and things like that. It's good to know that you're breathing something that is breathable, or at least not really, really bad. So I checked the air, was like, oh, I'm happy with this, cool. It seems to be naturally ventilated, fantastic. So I had a little walk through. There's a lovely little bit of crawl up there and a duck where you have to kind of go backwards and push yourself through, and the water's like a good few centimetres off the ceiling, which is good fun. I mean, I did leave the bottles by the end of the dive, but they might have been a little bit helpful when I was doing it. You can really see how low this is just by how hard I'm like pushing myself through at the moment. But yeah, so I found all this lovely dry passage, or at least I thought I did, and there were two routes. There was one off to the right, which is where the duck was, which looked more interesting because it's where the water was going. So it's like, oh yeah, I might find more sump, fantastic. And then there was one to the left, which is a kind of rifty, canyony passage, which was like, oh, that's walking height, I can do that another time, that's less interesting to me. So I'd spent loads of time surveying, found a rift at the end, and was really excited to climb the rift, made plans to buy a ladder so that a collapsible ladder that I could get through the sump to climb the rift, which is all very, very exciting and very, very kind of interesting. However, next time I came back to that dive, I then decided to, instead of going to the right, where all the interesting duck and things were, I decided to go to the canyony passage on the left. Now, I was doing this, and it was just going. There was so much passage, and I was so excited, because I was like, wow, this is like hundreds of meters. This is fantastic. And then I got into a massive piece of passage, massive bit of walking passage. And I turned around, and I saw where I'd come from, and I immediately recognised it as something called Shortcut Passage. So I went from having oh, this is an exciting find, to, oh, this is a really exciting find, to, oh, this is an amazing find, to, oh, this isn't a find at all, which was quite an interesting experience to go through. I did, in fact, actually write a long documentation about what I'd found, because I'm a very big fan that you should absolutely publish all of your discoveries, and I had to redact it all later, which is quite fun. So I hope you enjoyed seeing the Gothic Upstream exploration I did. Make sure if you want to see more UK sump stuff, you subscribe to the channel. Have a good rest of your day.